She looked up into his wet, tea-colored eyes, her pale lips trembling against the cold. "You've written thousands of words to me, Calder," she whispered, the rhythm of her breath steadying into something lethal and tight. "You've given me the physics, and you've given me the poetry, but you haven't yet told me that you're sorry." The hand remained in her grip for 3 minutes and 14 seconds. It was a metric Vesper Malone, tracked not by the digital display of her wristwatch, but by the rhythmic, industrial thudding of the frozen pneumatic pipes running along the ceiling of the Harrison Street garage. A long, grey pulse. A cold condensation dripping down the brutalist pillars. His skin was too hot. It was the frantic, metabolic heat of an engine that had been run without oil. The friction of a skeleton trying to find its way out of its own history. Calder did not pull away. He stood perfectly still against the crushed radiator of the Volvo, his tea-colored eyes fixed on her mouth, on the pale, raw skin where the Venetian earth lipstick had been forcefully scraped into the grey wool of her cuff. "You're waiting," he said. The gravel in his voice had dried out, turning into something brittle, like dead leaves caught in an iron grate. "You've got your fingers around my wrist like a tourniquet, Vesper. What are you trying to stop from reaching your heart?" "I'm waiting for the bass line," she whispered. Her fingers tightened, pressing into the small groove between his radius and ulna, feeling the heavy, erratic leap of his pulse. "I'm waiting to see if you have an unedited sentence left in your body. You've given me 6 months of syntax, Calder. You've given me structural analysis of the way a bone fractures and the way a perfume leaves a curtain, but you're hovering. Calder looked down at their joined hands. The grey light of the lake was failing now, turning the third tier of the parking structure into a kingdom of long, violet shadows. The wind through the concrete slats had a sharp ammonia tooth to it. I can't give you a syllable that makes it smaller, he murmured. He didn't drop his head. He kept his chin lifted. That broken ridge of his nose catching the sharp blue glare of the flickering fluorescent tube above them. You want a specific arrangement of vowels. You want me to say the word that lets you go home and close the closet door. But I won't do it. I won't say it. Why? Because an apology is a transaction, he said, and a sudden dark spike of aggression returned to his tone. The poetic cadence tightening like a fist around a throat. It's a request for an invoice. It's a man standing in the wreckage of a church saying, "Tell me what the window cost so I can write a check and leave." You want me to say I'm sorry so you can file me away under settled. You want to turn me into a closed chapter with a red margin note. He leaned forward, his face close enough that she could see the tiny silver flecks of old safety glass permanently embedded under the skin of his left cheek. The tiny glittering shrapnel of the median he had crossed. I don't need to tell you I'm sorry, Vesper, he whispered, his breath smelling of cold coffee and the dry, white dust of the salt crust. I think I need you to forgive me. There's a difference. An apology belongs to the law. Forgiveness belongs to the room after the lights are turned off. Vesper did not blink. She let her fingers slowly slide off his wrist, her hand returning to the deep, sagging pockets of Luca's coat. Inside the wool, her fingers instantly found the 9th grocery list. Parsley, garlic, sparkling water, the big bottles. Luca's handwriting was large, sloppy, and confident. It was the handwriting of a man who assumed there would always be another dinner, another kitchen, another morning where the wrong mug was filled to the brim. Under the heavy fabric, out of Calder's sight, her thumb rubbed the edge of the paper until it began to pill. He needs me to forgive him, her mind repeated, the thought turning over with the cold, deliberate precision of a printing press. He doesn't want to regret the blood. He wants to survive the consequence of it. He is using my ribs as a ladder to get out of his own pit. It was an architectural realization. For months, she had believed they were two survivors building a raft out of the splinters of a disaster. But Calder wasn't building a raft. He was building an altar. He had sought her out on the forum, not because his grief was identical to hers, but because her widowhood was the only mirror large enough to reflect the full scale of his crime without the police turning the lights on. He didn't want to look at Sienna's grave. It was too small, too quiet, too legal. He wanted to look at Vesper's mouth. He wanted to see his own guilt painted in Venetian earth, and then watch her rub it off until she was clean, believing that when she was clean, he would be permitted to sleep. It was a monstrous vanity. It was a poetic, highly literary form of cannibalism. Forgiveness, she said aloud, her voice light, almost conversational, the tone she used when an author had submitted a draft that was structurally brilliant, but emotionally hollow. That's a very expensive word for a Saturday afternoon in a garage, Calder. It's the only word that has enough weight to drop the anchor, he said. Then let's go back to the text, she murmured, turning her back on the shattered Volvo, her grey coat swirling around her ankles like wood smoke. Let's see if the ink can carry it. The air is too loud out here. I can't hear what you're trying to hide. The forum did not change, but the room did. Vesper now sat on the bathroom floor at 3 in the morning on the following Tuesday. The radiators in the apartment block were banging. A dull, rhythmic iron on iron sound that felt like an engine idling in an empty street. The laptop was hot against her bare knees. She had taken off Luca's grey coat. It hung from the brass hook on the back of the door. The red smudge on the sleeve looking black under the low wattage bulb she kept in the socket to keep the shadows from settling too deep in the corners. She was not crying. The archaeology of her grief had entered its final administrative phase. She looked at her reflection in the small porcelain tiles between her feet and saw that the puffiness around her eyes had receded, replaced by a sharp, clear silver light that looked like the edge of a chisel. She was growing efficient. She was eating toast with butter again. She could taste the salt now. She could taste the oil. She could taste the specific bitter tang of her own hatred, which had grown so large and so cold over the last 72 hours that it felt like a secondary spine keeping her upright. She opened the private message interface. The cursor was blinking, a steady blue line, a pulse without a voice. Plain text, private message, user Vesper M to user Calder M. Date June 23, 2026. Time 03:14 a.m. I keep looking at the police report from November, Calder. I went back to the files. There's a line in the structural narrative that doesn't make sense to my eye. It says the Volvo tires didn't leave any skid marks before the median was crossed. It's a clean break in the geometry of the road. When you told me about the headlights, about Luca trying to swerve, you said you saw his hands. Only the man with his feet on the pedals looks straight into the iron. Tell me about the wheel. Tell me what the leather felt like when the air became water. She pressed send. The message vanished into the white space of the server. She did not have to wait long. Calder was awake. She knew he was awake because across the city, in that apartment where the rugs had been lifted, he was likely sitting in the dark with a glass of rye and an unlit cigarette, waiting for the blue light to hit his chin. The ellipses appeared. It stayed for 4 minutes. It was a heavy, labored composition. He was editing his guilt in real time, trying to find the poetic arrangement that would allow him to confess without losing the right to ask for her absolution. Plain text. Private message. User Calder M to user Vesper M. Date June 23rd, 2026. Time 03:18 a.m. The leather was cold. That's the first thing the skin remembers. When the heat in a car is turned up to 72, but the wind of the lake is coming through the door seals at 60 miles an hour. The steering wheel stays like ice. It doesn't absorb the body temperature. It rejects it. I wasn't looking at the glass, Vesper. My hands were at 10 and 2. I had my thumbs hooked over the spokes the way they teach you in suburban driving schools when you're 16 and you still believe that the machine will obey the logic of the license. Sienna was asleep against the door. Her breath was making a small, round circle of mist on the passenger window, about 3 inches wide, disappearing and returning with every lungful. I was watching that circle across my shoulder more than I was watching the yellow line. I was thinking about the way a body populates a space without speaking. I had 3 old fashions at the steakhouse on Dearborn. Not 4, 3. But the beef was heavy and the butter was rich and the alcohol didn't stay in my stomach. It went straight behind the eyes, turning the headlights of oncoming traffic into long, blurred ribbons of amber and blue. The Chevrolet in front of me didn't hit the brakes. It didn't have to. The road simply vanished under my tire. There was a patch of black ice near mile marker 14. The kind of ice that physicists call a zero friction environment, and what the state trooper called failure to reduce speed to avoid an accident. When the wheel started to spin, I didn't let go. That's the lie people tell you about collisions, that you freeze. You don't freeze. You fight the iron. You fight it until your wrists click. I pulled the wheel left because the brain thinks left is where the open road is. But left was where the silver Ford was coming home from the salmon dinner. I saw him. I saw him for 3/10 of a second. He didn't have his headlamps on high beam, but his face was perfectly white in the glare of my own high beams. He looked like an editor looking at a bad line. He looked like he was about to say no. Then the noise arrived. It wasn't the sound of metal, Vesper. It was the sound of a large book being slammed shut in an empty library. A single, heavy, leather-bound volume hitting the floor from a great height. And then the mist on Sienna's window wasn't mist anymore. It was just the sky coming through the space where the door used to be. Vesper read the text once. Her fingers moved with a dry, mechanical certainty. She did not feel the poetic violence of his prose. She felt only the cold, sharp satisfaction of an archivist who had finally found the missing ledger page. She highlighted the text. Her cursor dragged across the paragraph. I had 3 old fashions. My hands were at 10 and 2. I pulled the wheel left. She opened a new folder on her desktop labeled Correspondence Final. She pasted the text into a blank document, saved it, and copied the URL of the forum thread. Her hands were perfectly steady. The radiator continued its iron-on-iron beat against the floorboards, but the sound had lost its power to alarm her. It was just a machine doing what it had been designed to do. She returned to the chat window. Plain text. Private message. User Vesper M. To user Calder M. Date June 23, 2026. Time 03:25 a.m. You left out the names, Calder. Who was driving the Volvo sedan? Who was the man in the silver Ford? Allow them their names, so I know what this forgiveness is for. The ellipses did not appear immediately. There was a long, deep gap of 6 minutes where the blue light of her screen seemed to frost over with the silence of the apartment. Then a single line appeared. Plain text, private message, user Calder M to user Vesper M. Date June 23, 2026. Time 03:31 a.m. I, Calder Mourne, was driving the vehicle. The man who died in the silver Ford was Malone. I have given you the names now, Vesper. The names are in the room. Are you ready to let the anchor down? Vesper stood up from the floor. She walked to the bathroom mirror, took a small, clean towel, and ran it under the cold water faucet. She pressed the freezing cloth against her eyelids, holding it there until her skin went numb. When she pulled it away, her eyes were wide, clear, and utterly devoid of the woman who had worn Venetian earth to the Art Institute. She sat back down at the computer and typed her final message into the interface. Plain text, private message, user Vesper M to user Calder M. Date June 23, 2026. Time 03:35 a.m. The anchor isn't yours to drop, Calder. I've just sent the transcript of this thread to Assistant State's Attorney Miller at the Cook County 2nd District Court. They've been looking for the driver who crossed the yellow line since November. The civil suits are over. The criminal narrative begins at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. The telephone rang 42 seconds later. Vesper did not answer it. She let it ring on the kitchen counter. The small plastic electronic chirp cutting through the apartment silence like a cricket trapped in a pipe. It rang 10 times, cut to voicemail, and then immediately began to chirp again. The persistence of the machine was pathetic. It had the frantic, unthinking rhythm of an animal caught in a snare, throwing its weight against the wire until the bone broke. On the 14th attempt, she lifted the receiver. She did not place it to her ear. She set it on the wooden kitchen table, switching the function to the speakerphone so that his voice would occupy the room, not as an intimate whisper, but as an acoustic anomaly in an empty space. Vesper. The speaker rattled. Calder's voice was wet, heavy, and loud. The poetic aggression he had used to dominate the basement gallery of the museum had completely collapsed, leaving behind a raw, desperate gasp that sounded like a man drowning in 3 inches of dirty water. Vesper, listen to me. Don't do this. You don't understand what the text is doing. You think you're fixing the line, but you're burning the library. She sat down in the wooden chair opposite the phone, her hands flat on the table, her fingers perfectly still. The library was already gone, Calder. You were just the man selling postcards of the ruins. I was trying to save you, he shouted, and the sound distorted through the small speaker. A sharp, metallic screech that made the water in her tea mug ripple. I looked at your posts every night. I saw you sitting on that floor. I knew that if I gave you the truth all at once, if I walked up to your door in November and said, I am the monster who took your husband's breath, you would have closed your eyes and never opened them again. I had to build a language for us first. I had to give us a territory where we could exist outside of the police report. The plea of a guilty man is always an exercise in creative non-fiction. He will use every metaphor in his vocabulary to turn a steering wheel into an act of destiny. You built a trap, she said. Her voice was dropping into that cool, editorial distance that had no rhythm, no poetry, no heat. You built a small, boxed room with thick glass, just like the ones in the museum. You wanted me to sit inside it with you, so we could look at each other's wounds forever, dustless and static, while the state of Illinois looked for a defendant. You didn't want to save me, Calder. You wanted an alibi that felt like a love story. It is a love story. His voice cracked, a high, desperate sob breaking through the gravel. God damn it, Vesper. Look at what we wrote. You think that was a lie. You think the coffee cups and the passenger seat and the language of the rain was a performance. I love you. I love the way your mind looks at a sentence and finds the fracture. I love the fact that you're the only person in this miserable, frozen city who knows exactly how deep the water is under the ice. I'm begging you. I'm on my knees in this room, Vesper. I'm begging you for your mercy. Don't hand me over to them. Don't turn the lights off. He was breathing hard. The ragged, wet sound of his lungs filling the kitchen, bouncing off the linoleum floor and the white refrigerator. It was a poetic plea, a beautiful, frantic arrangement of terror and desire, delivered with the full force of a man who believed that if he could just find the right cadence, the executioner would drop the axe. Vesper looked down at her hands. The salt crust of the garage was gone from her skin, but she could still feel the heavy, burning heat of his fingers where he had gripped her wrist 3 days ago. That's the first time you've said it, she murmured. The speaker went quiet for 3 seconds. The hum of the long-distance connection, the only line left between them. Said what? You didn't use the word sorry, Calder, she said, her voice perfectly level, perfectly clear. You said mercy. You said love. You said forgiveness. You've used every expensive literary word in your vocabulary to describe the torture you feel for what you've done. But you haven't yet apologized to the man in the silver Ford. A choked, rattling gasp came through the wire. I am sorry, he whispered, and the word finally arrived. Not as a transaction, not as an invoice, but as a small, broken fragment of a man who had run out of prose. Vesper, I am so sorry. I am sorry for the kitchen. I am sorry for the bookshelf. I am sorry for the light. Vesper reached out her right hand. Her fingers were cold, but they did not tremble as they hovered over the small red button on the interface that meant terminate. It's too late, Calder, she said, and her voice had the absolute, unmoving finality of a period at the end of a long, terrible paragraph. And the problem with honest things is exactly what you told me on the fourth night. They don't help. I don't care. She pressed the button. The speaker clicked shut. The vacuum returned to the kitchen. The sudden, sharp drop in barometric pressure that left her alone with the iron on iron thudding of the radiators. She stood up, walked to the brass hook on the bathroom door, and took Luca's grey wool coat down. She didn't put it on. She folded it carefully, the sleeves tucked inside, the red smudge on the cuff hidden beneath the heavy lapels, and she placed it in the bottom of a cupboard box she had kept in the hallway since November. She closed the flaps. She didn't use tape. She didn't need to. The weight of the wool was enough to keep the box closed. Outside, Chicago was still raining. A low, continuous murmur against the building's skin. A city muttering something private to itself that had nothing to do with her, and nothing to do with the text, and nothing to do with the light that had finally gone out in the dark.